Okay, so hello, Acton. We have not heard from you in quite a while. I think the last
Yeah,
time we were like hearing about Bonsai DB and stuff like that, and so it's been a while. You've been working on some new projects. Let us know what you've been doing.
kind of new and old. Technically, I think in the last demo, I was showing off a little bit of GUI as well as Bonsai DB.
Oh
I
yeah.
renamed GUI though because there was another framework in Python that I didn't think there would be much confusion over, but the first place that I posted the first alpha of GUI, the first comments were just bad name. And I'm just like, okay. So, anyways, I'm now introducing Cushy today, which is a reactive GUI framework for Rust. I've built it to be very WGPU centric. So it's rendering not using any existing widget toolchains. And then I've been inspired by Leptos. Leptos is a kind of reactive data model that's using signals and stuff. And overall, I found it to be really fun. So here's just diving straight into a couple of examples here. This is a button that increments itself. So dynamic is something that stores. I'm sorry, I'm having. Is there some background noise coming through? There's just all of a sudden leaf blowers outside, and I'm really worried about the noise.
Oh, sorry. I know you're all good. I think we're
Okay.
we just hear you. Yeah, you're good.
Sorry, that is incredibly distracting. But anyways,
No.
the dynamic is the reactive component. It's kind of like a fancy arc mutex that you can attach behaviors to. So in this particular example, the behavior that we're interested in here is count.set count.get +1. So every time that this button that we're creating gets clicked, it's going to be executing this closure, which is going to set the counter to whatever it is +1. And we're using the counter as a label in the button. And we can see over here that we have a live little demo, which might make you wonder, what in the world are you even looking at? And yesterday morning, when I was realizing that I needed to somehow present about Cushy, I was like, what would be really fun is, less than 24 hours before the presentation, writing some presentation software. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is the actual kind of inception version of this slide. This is actually including the code for the main file that you're seeing directly, and it's using the syntax library to do syntax highlighting and all that fun stuff. So I've tried to make it very easy to use, but just the fact that I even reached for Cushy to make my own presentation software less than 24 hours before a presentation should hopefully give you the idea that I really enjoy working in Cushy. So let me show off some more examples here. This is kind of taking it a step further with the dynamic system, and it's showing off how animations work in Cushy. So every time we click this button, we're going to generate a new random color, and we're going to transition the space that we have here, which has the color, to a new color over 1 second with an easing function. And this is all just being driven by the dynamic system. There's traits called linear interpolation and percent between that power a bunch of things. And I've implemented them from a lot of traits, and a community member has even made it so you can derive linear interpolation on custom types, which is really fun. So all that's to say that the system just kind of magically works, which is really cool. You kind of tie stuff together like this color.map each. I'm just using the format macro to format the hex string down here. And then I can just take that dynamic string that I have here and literally just throw it in the interface, and it just magically shows up as a label. So I've tried to make Cushy really straightforward and easy to work with. The only other fun thing about this that I wanted to call out is that the state for the animation is actually tracked by the closure itself. So this variable animation here is holding on to the most recent animation handle, which can be used to cancel animations. But what it also means is that if I click this button a bunch, I don't have like a bunch of different animations kind of competing. This is overriding the last animation, canceling it, and storing the most recent animation to keep it going. So anyways, there's a lot of really cool stuff working here. So then, let's take this even a step further. And now I have two picker widgets that are picking a color, and they're going to fight against each other in a lot of systems, right? Because when I change the HSLA, it's going to update the RGB, and the RGB is in turn going to be trying to update the color as well, which in theory should update the HSLA. But the way that everything works in Cushy just kind of makes this magically work, is that if I go in here and pick this, and I drag this lightness slider up, we can see that the RGB sliders are all going to full white. Now at this point, if the bidirectional bindings weren't working the way that I would personally expect them to, and that I think that most people would intuit them, we would have lost the hue color. But as I drag this back, you can see that the hue is actually kept. And that's because the HSLA picker is kind of the source of the change. And so by the time that the cycle that would normally happen where it updates the color color, then goes to RGBA, then goes back to the color, and then comes back to HSLA. At that point, because it's the source of the change, it can't actually update it again. So it kind of just breaks the chain at that point. And that makes it so that it kind of just magically works. And I'm sure there's some fun edge cases where that doesn't work. But so far, as I've been using Cushy and building things with it, it just works and it's great. And I really like it. It's fun. So kind of what's next? I initially released the initial alpha on December 18th. And then shortly after that, I added multi-window support. And then I've been working on generalized WGP support as well as off-screen rendering. That's technically all done. What I'm really working on right now is just kind of polishing up docs. And I started working on a user guide and I've been trying to flush out kind of an initial version of that. It's not going to be anywhere near complete because, Cushy itself is alpha. And so there's a lot of work to do on the framework. But just before people can really understand how to use Cushy effectively, I feel like the guide is a good place to kind of describe a lot of like why Cushy works the way it is, whereas the documentation is a better, place for the source of kind of how it works, I guess, in my view. So yes, that's kind of what's going on with Cushy, and I tried to keep the demo pretty straightforward. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'm not sure how Q&A works nowadays because it's been a long time.
Hey, all good. I have a ton of questions, and I'll keep an eye on chat and also on the Rust Game Dev Discord. So if you have any questions, feel free to toss them in there. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask them mine because
Sure.
I remember Acton, right before we started today's meetup, I'm like, oh, are you going to just have the presentation? You show anything off? And you're like, the presentation is the demo, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so cool. So I'm so happy that we got to see that and kind of so like see it interacted with and stuff. And so the first question I have is kind of how does this fit in the ecosystem of existing Rust GUI frameworks? And so the ones mainly that I've used, I know we use like Iced for Valorant. I think we used to use Conrod as well. And then for my own personal products, I've been using eGUI. And I quite like that if I'm doing like web application kind of things. I'm maybe using it in a different way than other people would, but I enjoy it quite a lot. And so how do you find that yours or that Cushy fits in?
So I think that the closest framework that I would say that I'm trying to like, I don't know, compete against. I'm not really trying. I think that the more frameworks, the better in the ecosystem. But if you want to call it competition, let's call it competition. But I think Iced is kind of the open source equivalent that I wish that I was happy using, but every time I use it, I find friction points that bother me personally. And that's not to say that it's a bad framework. It's a great framework. There's a lot of people using it very successfully. But basically, there's just some friction points that I thought that I could solve slightly better. It is not currently run at all on WASM. I do eventually want to do that, but I'm not like, my goal is to make a game someday, as odd as that is. That's how I started 3.5 years ago when I first showed off Cosmic Verge. I think February of 2021, I think, is the first time I showed up here. And I still want to do that someday. And I feel like Cushy is now at the point that I can start building a very basic, I want to say UI-centric game. But I don't really have plans on putting that in a web browser these days. I've kind of de-emphasized that. I'm a team of one mostly. There have been a couple of people who have contributed, but 99% of what you've seen today is all just me. And so while that's true, I'm going to just continue pursuing what I'm interested in. And WASM has a lot of sharp edges that I don't want to touch right now with WGPU and send bounds and stuff like that. And they're all tackleable. I just don't want to deal with them today. So from that standpoint, Cushy is really meant to be a desktop-centric framework to start with, and eventually, hopefully, it'll kind of spawn out to other related facets.
Awesome. And then I have one question here in chat. I think it's sort of similar. So there's like, I suppose Floam is the UI library for Laps, and kind of like looking at how that compares. And I'm just checking it out on my screen, and it looks like it's like a code editor type of thing. Maybe one question I had that's sort of aligned with this, or you can add on to this a little bit, but when it comes to UI frameworks, I think one of the biggest things that a lot of you'll have a very strong opinion on is how you do layouts on the screen and how you move things around, or how you allow the developer to decide how they want the screen to look. And so what kind of opinions do you have on that with Cushy?
So it's inspired a little bit by Flutter, even though I've never used Flutter. It's just that when I started envisioning how I wanted things to work, I started to want to design something that's very composition heavy. And so, like if you have three widgets, like three labels, and you want to lay them out on the screen, you have to decide what strategy you want to use. Do you want them to be stacked vertically on top of each other? Do you want them to be stacked horizontally? Do you want them to wrap kind of like text, go left to right and then flow onto next lines? And those are individual widgets in Cushy, and they take a widget list and present them. So there is a common way to create one or more widgets. That's a widget list. And there are multiple layout widgets that accept a widget list to be able to present that to the user. And so ultimately, like if you want a new layout strategy, you basically just implement a new widget that accepts a list of widgets and lays it out how you want to configure it. So you kind of have infinite flexibility from that standpoint because you can design whatever you want inside of that, paradigm. But it also means that from out of the box, I'm essentially building a bunch of little composable widgets that work well together.
Okay, super cool, super cool. And then I suppose when it comes to actually taking Cushy and using it in different cases, so right now we were sort of seeing an application that presumably is just using Cushy for like the entire UI. But have you thought of any work of integrating Cushy as a, I suppose, plugin for Bevy, or so that it could work with other engines or other, or maybe if I wanted to just say I'm going to use Cushy, but I'm also going to have my own renderer underneath. I'm going to use WGPU or anything like this for other things. What does that look like?
So I don't think that I'm a WGPU expert, sorry. But they have a development article called "Encapsulating Graphics Work," I think is what it's called, and they kind of describe a prepare render type API that they recommend for creating kind of reusable middleware, I guess if you want to call it that, or rendering passes. And so that's what the next version of Cushy exposes, is a way for you to essentially create a render pass and render it directly inside of your own WGPU applications. I have no idea how that actually works to integrate with Bevy, but one of my community members is interested in pursuing it. I just haven't released this version yet, so it's only on main. So once it's out there, I hope that other people can utilize it in any WGPU application.
Nice. And I guess on that topic, have you found, so with having a community that might be interested in Cushy or just in the work that you've been doing, have you seen any cool things that other people have worked on within the Cushy space so far?
Not yet. One of the first community members kind of started trying to make an application launcher before I barely had any widgets. And that person continues to revisit it occasionally here and there, and it slowly gets better and better. But I think that mostly what I've been building is the most complex things with Cushy so far. So I would love for more people to try to break it.
Yeah, awesome. And I think definitely I want to take a look at the source code for the slides, because one project that I've been super interested in is when I give talks. I think the talks that I give tend to be lectures, or not interactive enough. I want to do some things that people can play with, and having a framework like this that allows me to is like fully reactive. There's like already a demo of how to do it with slides. What I want to try hooking up is like the ability to do like maybe either quizzes or votes or anything like this, where it can connect to like a server. People can interact with it on their devices. And currently, like the ways that I've tried it with eGUI a little bit. I've tried it with Bevy, kind of just playing around with like, okay, well, does this idea work? But I mean, this is an amazing proof of concept that, yeah, like you can have some slides going, you can have some interactive elements, and so I think definitely I want to try and play around with it, mess around with it, and see how I guess maybe like the biggest thing for most people when they touch a UI framework is like, does it fit their ergonomic needs? And so I'm definitely interested to play around and kind of see what I find about it. So for like the source code of the presentation, that is that on GitHub already?
It is. If I can get my window manager to break out of it, I can probably. I was looking at Graphite, who's hopefully going to be demoing shortly here.
Yes.
But yeah, it's a Cushy-show on Consu Labs on GitHub, and the actual presentation that you were looking at is this introducing Cushy presentation, and so that's
Okay.
the entire presentation. This probably should be built in. I just needed a place to pull in a range of a code file, so that does the whole white space stripping and stuff like that. But yeah,
Nice.
this
And so
is
wait, the whole presentation's like just under 200 lines. it looks like.
Yes, although remember, I'm kind of creating like a library to go along with it. So this is
Yeah,
the
okay.
actual like framework for how the kind of the rusty DSL of the slides, like the show framework or whatever, is actually
Yeah.
powered. So
And
so
actually, can
this
you zoom
lib
into this a little
file,
bit? I'm kind of
yeah,
curious on
yeah,
how
sorry.
this Rust DSL that you have sort of like created right now is set up.
Actually, it might be easier for me to poke around
Yeah.
inside Visual Studio Code rather instead. That way I can actually like F12 to jump to definition. So yeah, like this content slide is a helper that I have inside of the actual presentation, which is essentially creating kind of the top and the bottom places and kind of creating the area in the middle. And so that's done by creating a V-split that fits the top part and the bottom part, but by default it expands the middle contents in the split.
Mhm.
So then, I put the title up top, and then I have special little helper slide elements that are the slide index and the slide count. And so this is kind of a good place, I think, to show how these slide elements actually work. I have a trait called slide element that has a make widget, and there's kind of a context that gives you some access to information about the slides, the deck itself. So like that's where the slide index actually comes from. So I'm just literally creating a label behind the scenes for whenever the slide index is used inside of slide content. So ultimately, everything implements slide element, which just has a responsibility to create a widget. That's how it all ties together.
Okay. And then I think you also said an interesting thing that you described as like the Rust DSL. And so if you hop back over to your main
Yeah.
code here, I think the one thing I find interesting about this is like as you're creating the slide and everything like this, stuff like content slide, H split, expand weighted. I would expect these normally to be so I assume they're imported functions or
Yes.
something like that. But it's very clean and concise. It's not what I normally would expect from. I'd expect that to be a macro rather than just actual Rust like functions being
I
called in that
try to
way.
avoid macros by default because they mess with the editing experience so much. And honestly, that's one of my friction points with a lot of UI frameworks out there is that they're very macro heavy. Macros have a
Mhm.
place, and I think that they're wonderful tools, but I try to get as far as I can with just the base language, but as my
Mhm.
initial approach.
Yeah. Okay. That's super cool. Yeah. And I mean, the way that it's laid out right now, it definitely looks a lot more akin to um, not exactly HTML, but you're describing the way that you're laying it out a lot closer to HTML
Mhm.
than it would feel like you're doing in a like a lower level language. And so, yeah, this is very interesting. Yeah, I definitely really want to check this out. I think it would be a pretty fun thing to play with. What kind of ideas do you have for the upcoming future on Cushy?
So I mean, ultimately, the biggest thing is more widgets because the most people are going to run into limiting factors of what widgets are available. I don't have like drop down buttons yet, pop up menus at all yet. I do have like popovers, overlay type things, but I don't have them all tied together to make a drop down widget, right? I have a table view, or so I have a grid view, but I don't have an actual table view. I have scrolling, so I have like all these individual parts, but I'm kind of missing the more complex widget still. Don't have multi-line text editing. So there's still a lot that definitely marks Cushy as alpha. I'd say that most of it's missing functionality, less than missing building blocks at the moment. So I'm kind of continuing to refine the building blocks that I've made, but I feel pretty good with kind of the foundation that I built.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is a pretty nice foundation. So I'm super excited to see where Cushy goes in the future months.
Thank you.
So Acton, thank you very much for showing off today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Perfect. We will be back in just a minute.